Okay, schools take two, or part two, I should say. So I was talking about how middle school students and high school students tend to change as a function just of getting a little bit older. Um, there's some other ways that teachers tend to change as a function of kind of being in a middle school and high school environment. And so it's really important to be aware of these ways in which they change because they're actually not really positive. Once you're aware of them, then perhaps you can do some things to improve them. So teenage, and these are things that are I kind of alluded to in an early slide on the PowerPoint, how there's a lot of mismatches between schools and where adolescents are developmentally. So this is like a good example on this slide. It says teacher changes. So they tend to focus a lot more on discipline. And this is at a time when teenagers are craving autonomy and independence, and yet they're being kind of micromanaged. Now, again, if they're not if they're not earning the freedom and autonomy, that's one thing. But if they are, it makes more sense. I feel like, we're still like, I remember in middle school, we couldn't eat at all. I was starving. I had like lunch at like 1:30. I hadn't eaten since 7, just not being able to say like, I'm really hungry. I'd like a snack myself. Like I'm a smart kid. I'm a good kid. Can I just please have a pack of goldfish or something, right? They don't trust their students. And this is also harder when, in elementary school, you're spending a lot more time with the same teacher. And in middle school, there's a lot of pros to this, like where you get teachers who are specialists in math or Spanish or, English language arts and things like that. You don't have to be a jack of all trades as a teacher, but you're spending less time with each student. And so while, again, there are like teams sometimes where like you're on team gold or you're on team blue or you're on team blah, 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 and maybe you take responsibility as a team for this group of kids, when you don't see the kids as often, you sometimes, like maybe you see them for an hour, a couple times a week, or an hour and a half a couple times a week. No one feels like they own like the responsibility of like, I don't know, that kid's, who's kind of responsible for that kid. Unlike a teacher in like, my daughter's, first grade classroom, like she is like, Lainey calls me Miss A because I feel like Miss A is like her mom sometimes, and she really completely looks out for all of their developmental needs, not only their education, but their social and emotional needs. And I think in school, when kids are really vulnerable to psychopathology and depression and anxiety and social pressures, the teachers aren't as present in their lives, and that's just kind of a hard thing to, it's hard to fight against that. I don't think it would be a great thing either if an 8th grade teacher had the same kids the entire day. But I do think there needs to be a way to kind of watch the kids a little bit more closely and take on those things. They also tend to believe their students' abilities are more fixed. So a sense like, oh, this kid's in the bad math, he's not a good at math. Like these are still young kids. They're not, they have room to change and grow, and their brains are still developing. If they want to kind of improve their math scores and like get into the higher math, I feel like they should, and that's kind of a scary thing for teachers to tend to think that their abilities are super fixed. And then finally, even teachers themselves start lacking confidence in their abilities, and so that's another finding. So again, I kind of mentioned the idea that they're changing classes, there's less time to form relationships with their students, so it's harder for them to identify issues promptly, and like the relationships are a little bit less personal. And so I think to a point, not that you need to be a professional counselor, because you don't, but I do think you have to kind of notice some of the warning signs. Notice if there's a change in your student. You have to take that responsibility. As maybe as uncomfortable as you are with it, it's kind of better off to ask and show that you're concerned rather than ignore something that you're worried about. So someone's all of a sudden starting to dress all in black and they look kind of despondent, you might want to ask. They might not bite that time, they might not want to talk, but you know what? You open the window, you open the door to it. I think you need to go there, and then you can collaborate with people that you feel more competent with, and or that you feel could handle the issue, like a school counselor or a school psychologist. But I do think it is within part of our job description to consider those things and notice those things. You never know what just saying one word can make, how much of a difference that can make. So let me see what I want to talk about. So we talked about the pros and cons of tracking, so kind of look at that a little bit more. The idea of stereotype threat, also just the idea that Sometimes there's this kind of bias, whether it's kind of implicit or explicit, that girls aren't as good as the STEM sciences. So even, here at John Carroll, there's not as many physics majors that are females as there are that are males, and there's not as many math and computer science majors that are female than there are male. And that's one of those things that actually on test scores, especially kind of prior to middle school and high school, females do better, if equal, if not better than males on math and science types of achievement tests, but then they kind of start to taper off and are just less engaged in those types of things. And so there's this element of sometimes girls go into this saying, like, early on, I'm not good at math, I can't do that stuff, I don't see other girls that look like me doing well in math. And also sometimes teachers bring in these biases, like, oh, he's such a little engineer, and maybe you might not pick up on that type of behavior in a female as much. So just be aware of some of your own biases and what are some common ones for females to have. There's a bit of a rub with respect to kind of desegregation in schools. Rooting from Brown versus Board of Education, we were saying, hey, it's not legal or constitutional to segregate schools based on race, but we know racism and discrimination certainly still exists. And if you go and look at, again, you go to Beechwood High School or Orange High School and look at the demographics of the kids there, and then you go to East Cleveland, you can see that there's, while not legal and ethically condoned, there is complete segregation at many of these schools. And so it's also, you can see it's kind of a mixed bag, because sometimes it's hard to be the lone minority in a school, full of maybe a majority group. And so in the case of African American students, they tend to have better academic outcomes when in a school that's predominantly Caucasian in nature, but they tend to have more compromised self-esteem issues, so that's not ideal. And then but if they go to a more desegregated school, they tend to go off to college more likely. So it's kind of a sad statement. Quick issue, let's see. So some teacher factors that are important in terms of school climate. How well teachers interact with students, how they use their time, their expectations. I would encourage you all to have very high expectations of your students and have them rise to that, rather than having kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy of having low expectations. I mean, it could go either way. A self-fulfilling prophecy, you could have something positive where your teacher expects something good of you and you do well. But on the converse, sometimes you can kind of tell sometimes, or kids are very sensitive to feeling when a teacher doesn't believe in them, or, oh, you're probably a bad seed just like your brother. And you tend to kind of underperform for those teachers. You're like, you know what, you think I'm worth nothing, fine, I'll show you, fine, whatever. Kind of get your self-esteem down, and that's not very fun. And students tend to achieve more during this responsive and demanding expectation, much like parenting, right? You want to be a teacher that's authoritative as well. So having high expectations, but a lot of high warmth and responsiveness, and seeming like you like your job and seeming like you like your kids, that's helpful. Teachers that are supportive but in control, and again, links to community, right? And kind of a depressing slide, not to end on kind of a depressing note, but I think it's not just depressing because there's things that you can do. And I think this is under discussed and underutilized. So there's a slide that's a graph, and it talks about climate of the classroom. And it's talking about kind of GPA and kind of academic success as a function of parent support and teacher support. And basically the depressing part of this slide is that you can be the most kick-ass teacher, you can be really giving them good stuff, being really involved, high support, but without any parent support, you're not really going to get very far. And so my words of advice to you, you future educators, is to really connect with the parents. I feel like parents are so underutilized. I know a lot of my friends who have older kids will talk about how I don't understand how my teachers or my son's teacher does this math. I don't even get it. I don't know how to help them. Having the parents come in who want to do a little workshop on math, right? Giving them some handouts. Calling the kids' parents, not just when they're doing bad, to tell them something nice. Having them fill out a questionnaire about their child. Hey, your kid best, what motivates him or her? What are they like? What are some subjects that they're interested in so I can even incorporate those into my lesson? Like, I would want to be asked more about my input in my kids' classroom. Having them come in, it's almost like this like separation of church and state, like separating parents from coming in past like second grade, you know. Bring them in. If a lot of parents have expertise in different areas, or, you know, again, this is part of another way to link to the community. The parents come into the school and see what's going on, they're more likely to support it. They feel connected with the teacher, with you, they're more likely to support you. I mean, that's a great thing. And, you know, you never know what parents had kind of bad experiences in their own high school. There might be some PTSD there. There might be, you know, some kind of like bad memories. So maybe you can make some alterations. But I think really thinking about creative ways that you can connect with mom and dad or a guardian or whomever, grandma and grandpa, whoever's with the kid. And so another thing, though, that sometimes happens and is happening in Cleveland is sometimes kids who are maybe shown to be, there's a program called Boys Hope, Girls Hope, and a lot of these kids have been shown to have like academic promise, although I think it should be done for kids with or without academic promise. Any kid who needs some help, they call them scholars, and what they do is because maybe their family situations are not great or ideal, and perhaps it's like getting in the way of their education, whether maybe the parents don't have the education themselves, they're working too much, they have mental health concerns or whatever, they bring them into, they have them live or board at the school, and then they have like mentors and support systems in place at the school. Not to say that they can't go home, but John Carroll students like yourselves could be tutors there, and so that's kind of one way. Sometimes if you can't really get, you know, because sometimes no matter how hard you try, you might not be able to get parent involvement. So sometimes in an extreme case, it might be like, let's circumvent the parents and let's just work directly with the child. So kind of to summarize what some good schools might look like, it's really prioritizing intellectual activities over like sports, so you don't show favoritism to athletes because you're gaga over football. Allowing teachers to teach, you know, freely and effectively, which is harder and harder in the age of, you know, Common Core and different things, but finding, you know, ways to incorporate your own unique flair of education, enhancing some of the Common Core themes with your own information, linking with the community, and having a good climate where they feel comfortable supporting one another, where they feel comfortable asking questions, they feel comfortable failing and growing from that maybe failure in learning, and to try again and persist. You know, you have to think, what do I want my kids, as a parent, as a teacher, as an educator, what do I want my students, my kids to get out of school, right? I mean, I want them to like learning, I want them to be creative. There's so many great documentaries and TED Talks about, you know, sometimes we're teaching them just to memorize things, and we want to teach them to solve problems and approach the world in a creative way. And so again, think about what kind of teacher you want to be. Think outside the box, like inspire them, use some of these things that you've learned, and I think, you know, the world is your oyster as a teacher and educator. So anyway, I will leave on that note. Bye.